Hey, yo, Sox fans. NWI Steve here once again for the Sox On Tap podcast show. Very special edition of the show. But before we get into all of that and why we're here today and what we're going to be talking about, be sure to go to ontapsportsnet.com for all your Chicago sports literature and podcasting needs. You can hear about some overrated foosball team that let you all down today. You can hear about the upstart Blackhawks who are showing some signs of life here in recent weeks. And, you can even check in on our beloved Chicago White Sox and some of the things that are going to be happening with them over the course of the offseason here. But what we're here to talk about today is a very special day. 20 years ago today, October 26th, 2005, it happened. A moment that a lot of us never thought we would get to see. Now, some of us were in the prime of our lives at that point. Others weren't. Others have gone through decades of frustration, pain, and agony following this team and finally got to realize the pinnacle of what baseball fandom is all about. October 26, 2005 at 11:01 p.m. is the moment when it all changed for us as Sox fans. And it is a day that, honestly, none of us that lived through it and were a part of it and were old enough to really recognize the significance of it will ever forget. Now, there's been a lot of frustration and a lot of angst that has come in the 20 years since then. We'll talk about that a little bit today. But by and large, what we're really going to talk about here is we're just going to talk about the emotion of that day and what it meant to us as a fan base, because it is something very significant. And for a lot of people, that is a day that still is one of the most significant, meaningful days for a lot of people in their lives. So let's talk about a couple things here. So 20 years ago, at this time, the Sox were up 3-0 heading into Game 4 of the 2005 World Series. They had just won Game 3 of the series in the wee hours of the morning on October 26th. Now, I know a lot of people like to say that the 25th was Game 3, but if we're getting technical here, the game ended on the morning of the 26th when Jeff Blum hit the home run in the 14th inning off Ezekiel Estacio, and Mark Burley came in and shut the door after doing some pretty cool and tough shit, pounding beers in the clubhouse before he took the mound and came in relief to get the save for Damaso Marte, giving the Sox a 3-0 lead, putting them on the precipice of winning the first World Series for this franchise since 1917, a whole 88 years. And, giving this city its first World Series in that time frame as well. So I remember where I was 20 years ago. I was in the first semester of my fourth year of college. And, that day was interesting. Not being able to focus at class. It was really hard. I know that going to the couple 2-tree classes that I had that day was not very productive for me. Focus simply was not there up until the wee hours of the morning watching Game 3. There was no way I was going to sleep that night, not knowing what the outcome of Game 3 was going to be. And I know most people were probably in that same boat. And I had a group of friends that I would see in the hallway in between classes. And, leading up to that day, even the prior day, we would see each other in the hallways and we wouldn't say anything to each other. We would just throw up the number 2 because we knew that there were 2 more wins that were needed. And so then on that day, on the 26th, we see each other in the hallway. Nobody would say a word. We just throw up one finger, because one game, 27 outs. That's what was needed. That's what everybody was thinking about on that particular day. It was almost a very calming feeling for me in that particular sense. When this team got up 3-0, I knew it was fait accompli. I knew there was no way that this team was going to lose 4 consecutive games. looking at what that team had accomplished over the totality of the 2005 season here, there was no doubt that it was going to happen. Was it necessarily going to happen that night? Didn't know for sure, but I knew it was going to happen. And knowing Freddie Garcia, the sweaty one, was going to be on the mound, a guy that for better or worse, um, he had caused me quite a bit of angst during the '05 season because seemingly every time I would go to games and he would pitch, he would kind of get roughed up a little bit. But he flipped a switch late in the season. He was the guy that was on the mound when they clinched the division in Detroit. He was the guy that was on the mound when they clinched the division series in Boston against the Sox through the third of the three consecutive complete games in the ALCS. And so then he was the guy that was there on the mound for game four. Went out there, threw up nothing but zeros that entire outing. Brandon Backey for the Houston Astros matched him pitch for pitch. And that was just a classic 2005 White Sox game. Low scoring, on the edge of your seat the entire time because it was going to be a close game. And that was so symbolic of what that team was during that season. It wasn't easy by any means. We all remember this team coming close to potentially losing a 15-game divisional lead to the hated Cleveland Indians, but they pulled it out. They got it together. There was one scary moment that Monday in September when Travis Hafner hit the 2 home runs off Freddie. That was the only time that entire season that I got scared. The only time. The next day, Joe Creedy followed it, hit the game-winning home run off David Risky in the 10th inning to get this team back on track. And then they went out to Detroit and they clinched the division on the Tigers' home field. And then they followed that up by going to Cleveland the last weekend of the regular season and sweeping the Indians out of the playoffs. The team that gave them the scare. They had a chance to still get in and still cause a problem. But the Sox went out there on their home field and swept their asses right out of the playoffs. And those losers have still never won a World Series since 1948. And it's great. And I love it. And I love every time they get into the playoffs and they fucking choke. They deserve it. But that's not what we're here to talk about. It was just a nice little icing on the cake, so to speak, back in 2005. October 26th is a day that I'm never going to forget. I was 21 years old that year. That entire month, that entire playoff run was by far the most enjoyable month I've ever had in my life. You talk about being 21 years old, being able to legally consume a couple 2-trip pops at a baseball game or at your local watering hole watching your baseball team. To have that exuberance at that point in my life and to have everything come together for this baseball team, I can't think of a better month that I could have possibly had at any point in my life. I tell people all the time that I like the Blackhawks. I enjoyed the Stanley Cup runs that they had last decade, winning 3 in a 6-year period right there. But I would trade every single one of those cups for another World Series because I like the Hawks, but I love the Sox. That World Series that was clinched 20 years ago today will always be the pinnacle of my sports fandom. Nothing will ever be able to come close to topping that. You think about all the generations of people that lived and died following this team, seeing the heartache of 59, 83. I think about 1993, especially with the Blue Jays being back in the World Series for the first time since then, and my first experience with baseball heartache. The agony of 1994 of Jerry Reinsdorf ruining the best team that he ever had, taking a World Series away from them that season. For it to finally come back and to come out of nowhere, because going into that season, nobody really expected anything from the Sox. There were a lot of changes that team made under the Ozzie Guillen as he entered his second season managing the club. Much has been talked about the Carlos Lee for Scott Podsednik and Luis Vizcaino trade, about not bringing back Jose Valentin, about not bringing back Maglio Ordonez, the shift in what that club was. But it worked. A lot of people questioned it going into the season. A lot of prognosticators thought that the team was going to finish fourth that season. But they did something that hadn't been done since the 1990 Cincinnati Reds and has not been done since. They went wire to wire, did not spend a single day in second place the entire season. So you have a lot of people out there, mainly of one particular fan base, that like to try to downplay what the '05 White Sox did. Like to say, oh, they just got hot at the right time. You know what? They did get right at the hot time. They got hot on April 1st because they didn't spend a single fucking day outside of first place. And then you know what they did? They got in the playoffs and they went 11-1. They dispatched the defending World Series champions. They took out the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, of California, of Orange County, of the Pacific time zone. And then they took out the Houston Astros. You want to talk about a team getting hot at the right time? That's what the Astros were. That wasn't what the White Sox were. They were the best team in baseball for that entire season. I know the Cardinals won one more game than them during the course of the regular season. But for that season, the White Sox were the best team in baseball. And they showed it. They didn't spend a day outside of first place, and they went 11-1. Only one other team has done that. I can't imagine losing more than one game en route to winning a World Series. I just can't imagine that, what that has to be like. I don't know, because I didn't have to. So, Game 4, the classic 2005 White Sox game, low scoring, edge of your seat, quality defense, good starting pitching. Jermaine Dye, top of the 8th inning. A relatively heralded signing, I would say, by most people. Coming into that season, the guy that replaced Maglio Ordonez. Ironically, those two guys share a birthday. There's just some very odd symmetry involved there. The base hit up the middle off Brad Lidge to score Willie Harris, to score the most important run in the history of the franchise. And that would catapult Jermaine Dye to being the World Series MVP. And I don't think that Jermaine Dye gets the love and gets the respect that he should, even within this fan base. I think that there's a lot of people from that '05 team that are talked about a lot. You don't hear Jermaine Dye's name mentioned as much as you really should. And he was really a stabilizing force on that team throughout the course of the entire season. But during the course of that World Series, he got the job done. He started things off, hitting the home run off Roger Clemens in the first inning of Game 1 at home. And he capped it off with the most important hit in the history of the franchise. You think about some of the interesting symmetries of the 2005 season. You think about opening day on April 1st, playing Cleveland, Mark Burley on the mound against Jake Westbrook. This team wins a game 1-0 on opening day. They go through the first half. They're just running people over. They have, I want to say, maybe a 9.5 game lead going into the All-Star break. They come out of the break in Cleveland. Again, team in second place. They win another game 1-0 to start the second half. And then you finish everything off. The weight of a franchise, the weight of an 88-year drought on your collective shoulders, and you win a game 1-0. The ultimate suspense in baseball, a 1-0 pitcher's duel. And this team found a way to do it because that's just what the 2005 White Sox were. Pressure didn't get to that team. We think about all the teams that have come since then. So many times this team is in close 1-run, 2-run games. And it's almost like we just wait for the other shoe to fall and for something bad to happen. Never felt that way with the '05 team. It just always felt like they were in it and they were going to find a way because that was a team of just baseball players that had the TWTW that Hawk loves to talk about so much. And they found ways to win baseball games. I remember being at the Saturday game against the Dodgers in, I think it was June, when they honored the 1959 team because that was the first time the Dodgers had played the Sox in Chicago since that 59 World Series, wearing the throwback uniforms. I remember being there with a buddy of mine, being in the upper deck, and you know, eighth inning, Sox are down 2 runs, and he's saying, we should leave. We should get a, move on the traffic. And I'm like, no, we're not leaving this thing. And AJ walks the thing off, 2-run homer off Yancy Brazoban, capping a 4-run ninth inning. That was just so symbolic of what that team was. They were never out of a game, ever, at any point. As a fan, it didn't matter if you were down 4, 5 runs. You always thought you were in that thing. You go back to game 3. You're trailing 5-0 against the Astros. First World Series played in the state of Texas. Houston had all the momentum going in that game in about the 5th inning there, 5-0 lead. Roy Oswalt, their best pitcher on the mound. And the Sox just chipped away, scratched and clawed, took the lead in that inning, just clutch hitting after clutch hitting after clutch hitting. That's who the 05 Sox were. They were a team that they didn't quit. The mantra, the win or die trying, they exemplified that. So much of what we've seen from this team in the 20 years since then with the various marketing slogans, the all in, I'll never forget that one in 2011. You think about this last group that we went through in Rebuild 2.0. You put together these marketing slogans and the players wouldn't go out there and they wouldn't back it up. That was not the case with the 2005 White Sox. They exemplified what win or die trying was all about. And a lot of that did start and did come from the top with Ozzie because he instilled that in them. He took the players to task in a lot of cases, but he also shielded them from a lot of bullshit that was out there. I think particularly when the team was going through the tough stretch in August and into early September. But it was that test and that struggle that they had during that period that I think really elevated them and got them to realize that, hey, we got to get our shit together here because we got a chance to do something really special, something that hasn't been seen in this city in 8 fucking decades. But we got to step up now and we got to make this happen. So this team and the significance of this, it shouldn't get lost on anyone as a Sox fan. There's a lot of people out there, again, of one particular fan base, but even some within the Sox fan base that say, stop living in the past, stop thinking about 05. Why? A lot of those people that say stop living in the past and stop thinking about 05, they don't hesitate to put on some stupid sweater that says Bears, trying to memorialize the most overrated coach in NFL history from a team that hasn't done anything in 4 decades. But yet, us as Sox fans, we're not supposed to look back fondly on the best moment that this franchise has ever had. It's bullshit. This is a day that anybody that is a Sox fan should look proudly upon and should look at with joy. Because if you were old enough to be able to appreciate it, if you had to go through any modicum of baseball heartache like I did with 1993, 94, people that were alive for 83 and 59, you should celebrate this. You should look at today as a day that you didn't think you would ever get to see. And you should be proud of that. And you should realize that it was one of the happiest moments in sports fandom that you can possibly have. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't be realistic about where this franchise is at and the agony that has resulted in the 20 years since then. Immediately following that championship in 2005, they went out, they had themselves a pretty good offseason overall in 2006, made moves that I thought on paper made them better. They brought in Jim Thome. They traded for Javi Vasquez. They tried to fortify the bullpen and the bench, bringing in guys like South Suburban College's very own Rob Makoviak, Alex Cintron, several other players, trading for Mike McDougal throughout the course of the season. They tried to go out there and repeat. You had a team that won 90 games and finished in third place. Just classic White Sox scenario where the one year the Central Division is actually good, it comes back and haunts them. And the playoff formatting at the time was you only had one wild card outside of the 3 division winners. If you would have had some of the other playoff formats that have taken place with, a second wild card or even the format that we've got now, that team would have had an opportunity to defend their title. But it didn't happen. 07, team mired with injuries, finishes 72-90. That was to that point the worst team of my White Sox adult life. And then they followed it up in 2008, won a division title. And I still believe that had Carlos Quentin not broken his hand on September 1st in Cleveland, they would have won the American League pennant that year, and they would have gone on to face the Philadelphia Phillies. So they could have had a second World Series appearance in a 4-year stretch. And that could have changed a lot of things for the trajectory of this franchise. But those things didn't happen. The frustrating thing as a fan that came out of 2005 was that should have been a turning point for the franchise. That should have been an end of this team being, a franchise that just isn't thought about as an upper echelon one. That should have been the beginning of the White Sox organization being up there with the likes of the Yankees and the Ginger Sox as powerhouses in the American League. They should have been running roughshod over the Central Division for years and years to come, putting themselves in position to get back to the World Series. But that didn't happen. In the immediate aftermath of it, they did the right things. But following that 2008 season, things just really stopped. And that's where the frustration as a fan comes into play here. Because again, that championship that happened 20 years ago today, that should have been a turning point for this organization, for this franchise, and for this fan base. Think about the New England Patriots. Before they won the Super Bowl in 2002, nobody cared about the Patriots outside of Boston. They weren't a household name. They weren't a national brand. But when you win a championship and when you go to build upon that and consistently make the playoffs and do the right things to build a competent, competitive roster year in and year out, that's how you grow a fan base. That's how you grow a national following. And that's how you put yourself in a position to become a dynasty. The White Sox didn't do that. And we all know why. We all know who is responsible for that. Never forget that. Never forget the fact that in the immediate aftermath of 2005, that should have been an opportunity for this team to go into a different stratosphere. But somebody didn't want that to happen. And somebody stood in the way of that happening. From 1990 until 2010, the only team in the American League that won more games than the White Sox was the Boston Red Sox. Did they have a lot to show for it outside of the division titles in 1993, 2000, and then ultimately the World Championship in 2005 and a division title in 2008? No. But what has come since then, the last 15 years, has been just truly abysmal. And it shouldn't have happened. It should have never happened. The fact of the matter is the joy that we felt on this day 20 years ago is something that we should have been in a position to realize on a more consistent, regular basis. But one person stood in the way of that. We all know that the clock is ticking. It's not long until the reign of terror comes to an end. Now, long time, it's all relative from an individual perspective here, but we know we do have a definitive date, 2034 at the absolute latest. The hope and the goal for this fan base is that Justin Ishbia, when he assumes control of this team, will realize what he has here and will do what is necessary to put this franchise back in a position to realize and to feel the excitement and the joy that was felt on this day 20 years ago. 20 years can be a long time for a lot of people. It's half a lifetime ago for me. I'm 41 years old now. And if you think about it, if you look through the history of this organization, well, they go about 40 years in between winning pennants. So the cynic could say we're halfway there. For somebody like me, I got to make it till I'm in my 60s then. I think about people like my dad, who's 72 years old. Is he going to make it another 20 years? A lot of people listening here have parents that are going to be in their 60s, 70s, and possibly in their 80s in 20 years. It shouldn't be like that. I shouldn't even be making this a joke, but this is what has happened with the course of this franchise and everything that has taken place since this team won the World Series 20 years ago today. There's hope on the horizon. There's hope that when Justin Ishbia does assume control of this team, that he will treat it like the major market team that it should be. And that this team will then be positioned to go to the playoffs with regularity and to eventually compete to win another World Series title like they did on this day 20 years ago. So we're not at the bottom anymore. We lived through that nightmare last season. It's a slow upward climb to get out of the doldrums that this franchise has been put into. But there is hope. There is a modicum of hope that can be here. Those of us that were able to appreciate and to enjoy what took place 20 years ago today, we want to feel that again. We really do. And it's possible. It can happen. Under the current constraints of the existing ownership group, most likely not. But the hope is that won't last much longer. I know for me, October 26, 2005 is, one of the happiest days of my life. I'm not married. I don't have kids. I don't have anything like that to look at and compare it to. So this is always a special day for me. And it's a special day for a lot of people. And we as Sox fans, we should be able to have more days like this. This shouldn't be all that we have to look back fondly upon. Sometime soon, it's going to change. Sometime soon, there's going to be something positive to look forward to. We don't know when that's going to be. So for right now, October 26, 2005 is the thing that we have to hold on to and the thing that we have to look at for hope. 20 years can be a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, maybe it isn't. Only time will tell. I know how joyous and how happy I was on that day 20 years ago. I was a young kid. I was in college. I didn't have any gray hair. I was going through life free and easy. It was the best of times. I want to feel that again sometime soon here. But until that happens, always look back on 10/26/05 with a smile if you're a White Sox fan. At 11:01 p.m. tonight, crack a beer, do a shot, and think back to where you were 20 years ago when it happened. Because for a long time, people told you it wasn't going to happen, but it did. Like Dustin Hermanson said in the 2005 World Series DVD, they didn't die trying. They won. That's it for today here. The Sox on Tap post-game show. Be sure to always be going to ontapsportsnet.com for all your Chicago sports literature podcasting needs. We'll be back again soon at some point here over the course of this offseason to bring down what the White Sox are doing. Until then, White Sox for life.